Hello, everyone. This is Sheila Hollinger from Marriage Revealed Ministries. I wanted to talk to you today about what standing is, what we're doing, what is God doing, the bigger picture, and try to help clarify the message of standing for marriage restoration. We're going to go into a lot of topics that are covered on our website, such as zipping your lips, letting go, just so many things, the hard heart. And so I've got a lot of information. You might want to pause this video, grab a pen and paper, and take notes. So let's dive in. The first thing that happens when your marriage falls apart is you go looking for answers, you go looking for ways to control the situation because, your world has just fallen apart and you might be absolutely terrified. You're hurt. A lot of times when our marriages fall apart, there is another person, there is adultery involved. And there is such a disconnect with your spouse between truth and reality. Your truth and their reality seems to collide and they don't make sense. In a heartbeat, you can see someone that you've been married to for a long time suddenly becomes someone you just don't recognize and don't know. And what happens when that happens to them is it suddenly puts you into a position where you may not fully recognize and understand yourself. I know for myself, I was restored 7 years ago, but my storm started 14 years ago. So I just had a baby, our first child, after 18 years of being barren. And so we were married 18 years, and I went to my spouse and I revealed that we were about to have a child, and something happened. He went, I can't really describe, it's not my story to tell what happened to him, but I can tell from my point of view that he completely fell into a state of walking away, and instead of embracing the fact that he was about to be a father, he went the opposite direction and became more like being a child himself, wanting to have fun, wanting to run away from responsibility. I could go into everything and say, oh, he was probably afraid, or he was probably upset, or I'm not going to do that. Only God understands and knows the heart of your spouse and exactly what was going on, what made them turn. And unless God reveals that to you and shares with you, it's a guessing game. All I can say is that, I saw what was going on outside externally, and he was not embracing this as I was. And so he fell, really hard into just wanting to be outside of the home. He wanted to go and have his freedom, have fun, and that eventually led to him acting like he was a single man, not a about to be a father. And then when we did have our child, our first child, he was never around and he didn't act like a father. So this was not something that he was embracing the way I wanted him to. And so his rebellion and deception and darkness caused me to fall into a place of absolute anger, terror. The fear made me want to really try things to control the situation. I was already a woman who controlled. I was already a woman who lived in fear. And that only escalated and made me want to control and stop him from doing what he was doing, even more. And we had both been Christians. we were lukewarm, in and out of church, in and out of church groups, in and out of leadership groups. I mean, you name it, we had done it. But it just didn't click in our hearts. We were going through the motions. We were both not, I would say, anywhere near knowing and loving God. We just had not gotten to that place. There had never been an area in both of my life or my husband's life where we had been in a position of suffering, where you had to lay down everything to connect with God and get to know him. And that's what suffering does, where you can't control the situation. For example, you have someone who is very ill and you can't control it. So you go to God in that suffering and you have to rely on your faith. You have to seek him to get through whatever you're going through. My husband and I had never, ever been in a place of that kind of suffering. If we had come across anything that was difficult, we leaned on each other. And we had been dependent on each other for 18 years of marriage. And so, this was a new situation for the both of us. He was going one way, and I was left without him, completely alone. And I didn't know what to do at first. Like I said, I tried everything on my own. And when that didn't work, I realized that I had to go to God. And that is where, as a group, as a ministry, we open the doors and embrace anyone who is in that same position where they have found their marriages completely torn apart. Sometimes it's not from adultery, it's just from a spouse who says, I'm done. I can't live this way anymore. I'm not happy. I don't love you anymore. Sometimes there is another person involved, and sometimes there isn't. And sometimes that other person that is involved is not an affair partner. It could be a best friend, it could be a coworker, it could be a mother-in-law, a father-in-law, a sister, anybody that is influencing your spouse in any sort of way, pulling them away from the marriage. And how is that possible? How can someone have that much power? Well, they don't. They're just there at the right time. Whether it's an person that, pulls your spouse into adultery, or a mother-in-law who really never liked you and they get in your spouse's ear, it's really not them. There's they cannot have that much power over a person. No one can. What happens is that person is connecting with something that is already going on in a person's heart. Okay, you cannot be tempted by something that isn't connecting to a desire. Temptation and desire have to go hand in hand. You know, you get tempted by something that looks attractive, something that makes sense, something that your heart is longing for. And when you have a spouse who has got some issues in their life, they are disconnected from their purpose, they are disconnected from the reality, their identity of what they were created for. That creates a big open door to be tempted to find out what's wrong. A lot of times, what's going on in your spouse's heart is they are wandering, they are lost, and it starts to build slowly. We are created to know God, to love God, to have that relationship with Him. And over time, we are three in one. We're a spirit, we are a soul, and we are flesh. But over time, when your spirit, which was created to be one, be united with God, when it's not being connected to Him, it's not being in a relationship with Him, it will start to wake up protest. It will start to to feel discontent. And that's where you will have a spouse that will start to say, I'm not happy. I haven't been in a long time. Now, it starts to look, starts to wonder, it starts to wander, it starts to want to figure out. And that's the soul listening to the spirit. The spirit's complaining. I'm not with God. I'm not happy. I'm not in a relationship. I don't have an identity. I don't know where I came from. Your spirit is just talking, and it's not born again. It's not awake. It's not connected to who it should be connected to. And I'm trying to explain all of the different, things that your spirit can start to say. And I'm not going to make complete sense. Not everything I'm saying is exactly what your spirit would say, but I'm hoping that I'm getting out the point and the message. Your spirit is just putting off a feeling that something is just not right, no matter how much money you have, no matter how, perfect everything is in your life. You might have everything you've ever dreamed of and desired, but if your spirit is not in a true relationship, it's starving. It doesn't have the food it needs. It doesn't have the connection it needs. And the soul, when it's never understood God, the soul is you, and you will go, your mind will start to look for things in the past that's made it content, made it happy. It will remember, the relationships that brought that kind of a peace, a kind of a joy, a kind of a happiness. And what happens to a person who is in this state is they will open up their hearts to be tempted in a way that, we don't want to see. We don't want their hearts to be tempted to blame us, to look at us as the cause of their unhappiness. And this is where the enemy will come in and tempt them with someone outside of the marriage. Like I said, an affair partner or a friend, a coworker, a mother-in-law, father-in-law, who says, well, you're not happy because there's something wrong in your marriage or your spouse or your family or whatever. This is how the heart starts to entertain that to be happy, to overcome this deep unrest, this deep feeling of unrest that's going on in their soul, in their spirit. They will start to entertain that what they're looking for is not in the marriage, it's outside of the marriage. And when another person comes along, and a lot of our spouses do get caught in these affairs, there is so much deception and lying going on with this other person that they're promising to make everything better. They're promising to give the heart um whatever it is it's looking for and crying out for, which could be for a man who's never felt respected, he's never felt appreciated, he's never felt wanted and adored and looked up to. And then he meets this other person, and she starts to give him everything that has been, going on in his mind as what is wrong in the marriage. And he finds this, he is going to be tempted. He's going to desire what she's giving him. Same with a woman who is at home feeling ignored, feeling unloved, and she's blaming her husband for this. It's his fault that I'm empty. It's his fault that I'm not loved. It's his fault that, I'm feeling so broken. Instead of her seeking God for the healing, because we are not meant to get that from a person. People are not, there's brokenness, there's ways that we get hurt by people, but it's not, when we're in a right relationship with God, it should never devastate us to the point that we let ourselves get devastated. we let people destroy our identities. We let them destroy who we are, and we become so lost and so broken. We get these roots of rejection and shame and unworthiness from people, and it's because we are not standing on the foundation of God. We don't know his love, we don't understand him, and that is how we become sitting ducks for the enemy to come in and completely sidetrack us away. And we get tempted. We see someone offering all of these wonderful things that we have been missing. And, there's just so many places that we can get tempted. You have a person who's just been feeling, I'm just, I'm not happy. I just feel worthless. I hate myself. There's just so many areas. And then you have someone that comes along with what appears to be the antidote to take away those places that are just have been tormenting you. But see, that's how the enemy works. The enemy works to come and lead you down a path that takes you away from God. Now, what happens in this situation is once your spouse has been introduced to this new place, this new person, this new promise, this new come away with me, and I'm going to give you everything that you've been missing. And we're going to, blame your spouse. We're going to blame your marriage. We're going to blame the responsibilities. We're going to pinpoint exactly what's been going on with you and why, you are not happy. And for some spouses, they will instantly embrace it, and you get that all of a suddenly that comes out of nowhere. For some spouses, it's a slow, gradual, they will start to enter into this relationship. You'll start to see a very slow change with them. Um, for me, it was, my storm started when I told, I guess for me, it was my storm. I could see it coming when I revealed to my husband that we were about to have a child. He started to turn and change, but it was like you saw the storm coming. And then all of a sudden, it just hit full force. And he had been around a little bit, but it wasn't till our baby was born. She was about 3 months old, and all of a sudden he stopped coming home. He was just gone. And that's when the storm fully arrived. It just, he just gave over to it. And I believe that's when the process of what we call the hard heart. Jesus talks about the reason for divorce is because of the hardness of heart. And when you study out the word hard heart, it means void of oil. And we all know that the Holy Spirit is the oil. And the heart turns. When you study out the Bible, there is different places where God hardens the heart. There are places where it says that a person will harden in heart. So it is like a connection that this person is deciding, I'm going to walk away from myself, God, my spouse, my family, my marriage. And in order to do that, a person has to embrace something, a lie. They have to blame. They have to deflect. They have to pinpoint something else as the reason it's giving them permission to do all of that. Because, some people do it instantly. They just let this hardness come and overtake them. And then there are some spouses that do it gradually, bit by bit by bit. And they might like entertain what someone is telling them. Then they go a little bit further and they might go out on a date. They might start flirting and and for some person it could be a months to take them to get to that point where the standard is seeing this gradual pulling away, this gradual hardening, this gradual distancing. They can feel something's not right, or you can have a spouse that just does it instantly. They get tempted and they just go for it. And that really depends on the level of how discontent they were feeling and how fast that temptation came in and just snared and captured your spouse. And I have seen, standers say, I had no clue this was coming. And it happened overnight. I came home and my spouse said, I'm done. I want a divorce. And, they had no clue. Where some people said I could feel it. Something was not right. I kept asking my husband, I kept asking my wife, is there someone else? And they would say no. And then it would become revealed later that yes, there was. So there's no set rule how the hard heart comes, but it seems to always be a spouse who definitely has an area in their life that is not connected to God. Now, let's use King David as a perfect example because a lot of spouses are in church. A lot of spouses are growing up with some type of a relationship with God. This is not just for people that don't have a relationship with God. King David, we all understand his relationship with God. He had when he had a very strong relationship with God. But there was a part in his life, in his heart, that night it says that he was discontent. He was out at twilight. And when we study the word, if you go onto our website, our Marriage Revealed website, there is a article that I have written out called Twilight. You have to use the word twilight. It talks about a place in a person's life where it is between night and day. And it is a darkness, a hidden secret place where they think that they can enter into sin and God will not see them. Twilight is a very dangerous place. And King David was walking in this season in his life in twilight. It says he was in twilight, and that's when he saw Bathsheba. He was supposed to be out in battle. Okay, he was a king. There's a reason that he wasn't doing this, and who knows what was going on with David. But he found himself in a season in his life where he entered into adultery, trying to cover up with lies and murder. And then he wound up marrying Bathsheba, okay? And Nathan had to come to him to expose this dark area of his heart that he was not surrendered and submitted to God. Because Nathan did not approach David in a way that says to us that he came right at David and said, David, you were wrong. You did this. And the reason for that is because David's heart was hard. And you cannot talk to a hard-hearted person face to face that way. Okay? How do I know this? Because I came at my husband face to face. Every stander has come at their spouse face to face and confronted them and said, what you're doing is wrong. And what did you get back from your spouse? Most times, I would say 99% of the times, your spouse did not agree with you. That is the deception they are in. That was the deception and hardness of heart that David was in. That if Nathan had come to him face to face with the truth of what he did wrong, the hardness of heart would not have allowed David to see it. Nathan had to come through a back door, a different way. And that is how God approaches our spouses, not us. He sends the Nathans, which could be look like anything. It could look like a TV show. It could look like them just walking out their life day by day with something coming through in their hearts. God looks at the heart. He speaks to the heart. He knows and understands what your spouse needs. Nathan was able to approach David and give him a speech that bypassed, went right past the hardness of heart and touched something in David where David saw, heard, understood everything Nathan was saying. And he got angry at this supposed person that Nathan was talking about. He could see the sin. He could see the rebellion. He could see the lies, the disobedience, everything that Nathan was saying. but he could not see that that man was himself. And that is how God reveals sin to anyone with a hard heart. He speaks exactly what is needed. And as a stander, we need to understand that that is God's place. That is God's role. It is not our role to try to change a heart that is hard. All we are going to do is harden it further. And anyone who has had those long talks with their spouse, or sent someone to have that long talk with their spouse, understands the message that I'm delivering here. They know that nothing good came out of it. They know the spouse would come back with, their own version of the truth. They would make up lies. They would twist things. That is deflection. It's another key word to write down that every stander needs to know about. Deflection is when your spouse has been tempted to turn and go after this new temptation that has promised them the peace, the content that they have been seeking, promised them the love that they've never gotten, the respect they've never gotten. Something is missing in their life. We know it's God. We know that now. That is for a new standard to really embrace and understand. This is the transformation process of a stander who comes looking for help to get that spouse back, believing that it's all about them, it's all about marriage. But the real truth is that a broken relationship, something in a relationship that wasn't right with God, is the real reason. And we'll get into that a little bit more. But let's go back to deflection. When a spouse believes that they have to pursue this area that has just come along that's promising them everything, they are going to turn with a hard heart and say, me first. I'm going to be happy now for once. I've given everybody else everything they've ever wanted, and now it's my time to be happy. How do they do this? How can they live with the fact that they are um, entering into either adultery or listening to someone, divorcing, abandoning their spouse, abandoning their children? The hard heart, we see some really awful things that come out of it. You have spouses that walk away and completely cut off all financial support to the spouse, the children. You see wives that disappear and take all the children and do not let the husband anymore, see their children anymore. And you say, how could this be? Well, what happens is your lost spouse has to enter a place of blame. It's the only way for them to get away in their own minds and their hearts. And they have a support system. They will pull in family, friends, anybody that will support what they're doing. And they will badmouth you. They will assassinate your character. They will make up all these lies. Not all of it's lies. Some of it really is truth. Some of these standards, for example, myself, I was not a good wife. I had a lot of control issues. I had a lot of fear issues. I did not treat my spouse good. I was critical of him. And every bit of that was truth. And what my spouse did was he took everything I did, he magnified it and used it. That was his ticket out. That was his ticket to having a hard heart and being able. That was their justification. Deflection has to find a justifiable reason, even if it is the smallest of small reasons. A lot of standards will say, my spouse used something I did 20 years ago to be the justifying reason why they're walking away right now. That's the deflection. It eases their guilt. It puts all of the blame onto your shoulders or the marriage and says, this is why I am allowed to leave. This is why. When all in all, the truth is they're not happy. And where did that unhappiness come from? And let's go backtrack a little bit. The unhappiness comes when a spirit is not in right connection, relationship, doesn't have what it's supposed to have, what we're created to have with the Father. And that opens the door to the enemy to come and snare them with a desire, something that comes before them that they just cannot say no to. You have the most wonderful, loyal, unbelieving spouses turn in a heartbeat, and it is heartbreaking to see it. Now, on the other hand, what happens to us as a stander? You have a lot of standers who, after, like I was sharing, after the initial, freak out, world upside down, inside out, you've tried everything. You are at a place now where, you have friends and family saying, it's done, move on. Either they've moved in with the other person or they have divorced you, or another situation is where you have a spouse who is living at home. They're not able to go move in with that other person. That other person could be married, could be hiding, from your from their spouse. So you have so many different situations, and now you are at a crossroads. What do I do? I have done it all. This is where you either file for divorce, agree to the divorce, and you start the healing process of moving on, letting go. Or you've been hearing the whisper of God saying, trust me, I have a different way. I have something else. And that's what our ministry is there for. For those people who have heard that call, heard God calling. There are a lot of people out there that chose the other path. A lot of people wouldn't even listen, not for a moment, to what God was calling them to do. They have bought the lie that once your spouse has entered into adultery, you're free, you're allowed to divorce, it's justifiable, and you are able to now move on. And we're here to tell you that if that was the case, then nobody would ever have been called to stand, because God doesn't pick and choose, you're going to be standing and you're not. I believe he calls everyone whose spouse has turned away in adultery to come to him and learn why and to stand. And in that standing is where you learn the real truth. If you look at a husband and wife, if you look at God's creation, he never created a man to marry, build a kingdom, have children, have a family, and then just decide, you know what, I'm going to walk away. I'm going to give all of this up and just go take over another man's kingdom, abandon my family, and start over. And that is not the way God blueprinted and designed a man. He did not design a woman to just up and leave and take the children from her husband. So many other different things I could go into here, but when you look and see how the marriages are breaking, you can see the enemy's hand all over it. And everything that I'm sharing here, you could see how it is the exact opposite of how God created us in his image. God is about love, loyalty, faithfulness. Everything that happens in this situation is the exact opposite of God's character and nature. Adultery, unfaithfulness, lying, stealing someone else's spouse. There's just so much here that is out of character. Nothing is moral. Nothing is good. It's all bad. It's all deceit. There's so much heartbreak. So that is a reflection of the character and nature of Satan, the enemy, our enemy to God. And when the world embraces that and says, oh, you're not happy, then just leave your marriage, leave your spouse, leave your children, go find someone else that makes you happy, because you've only got one life and it's all about being happy. That is not God. That is not his character. That is not his nature. Nothing about that is God. If you read the Bible, you will see his nature and his character is so plainly wrapped around long suffering, patience, endurance, transformation. There is no story in the Bible that did involve. To be in God's will means you have to put down your will, which involves pain, which involves suffering, which involves saying no to the flesh. Everything that your spouse just did not do to leave the marriage, to walk away. They did not deny themselves. They denied God's law, God's will, God's heart, God's nature. Every bit of what they're doing is in rebellion to who God is, how God created us and created marriage. Marriage is a reflection of the Lord, of his relationship with us. So when a person is walking in rebellion, they are rebelling against God himself. And that is why our ministry is works very hard to teach you that your marriage did not break. And I want you to write this down. Your marriage did not break because of your relationship with your spouse. It broke because of your spouse's relationship with God. Whether it had, missing parts, broken parts, or no relationship at all. That is the reason it broke. That is the reason the heart was easily tempted and went astray and started seeking something else. These are the basic principles that we as standers come and learn. We come looking for one thing when we enter into standing groups, or you go looking on the internet and you type in for standing ministries, or you get on the websites and you're looking for ways to heal, save, fix your marriage. And it comes by this introduction that, God restores marriages. So you enter into this place with this hope that, you've done everything and it's not working. And now you need to turn your eyes to God and say, okay, it's not working. What do I do now? And that's when you start to be introduced to the transformation that takes place in us. And it's about learning how this is so much bigger than what we realized. This is about your relationship with God. Many people come and they realize that they really don't have a true relationship with the Lord. They don't know him like they should. They don't understand him. They cannot say with all honesty, God, I love you with my whole heart. I know I couldn't. And that is a big part of the um, testimony that I give, is that it took me a very long time in my stand. My stand was 7 years, and it took me 6 years and 3/4 of the way to be able to say the words to God, I love you. And at that point, 6 3/4, it came out, and I knew that I knew that I knew that it was a truth. Where I knew all that other times that I was just saying it, knowing that I was not honest. And I loved my husband more than I loved God. And at some point in my stand, I was confessing that to God and letting him know that this man meant everything to me, and I knew that I was just using God to get my husband back. And that was the transformation that God was trying to expose to me and reveal to me, that this was bigger than a marriage restoration. He was trying to show who he was. He was trying to say to me, daughter, you don't know who you are because you don't know me. Your husband is lost because he doesn't know me. And as I opened myself up to the fact that this was so much bigger than God just healing a broken marriage, And I saw that as I was pursuing God and I was heading in a direction, I had to trust God that God was also doing the same exact work in my husband, even though it absolutely looked completely hopeless, helpless, and the opposite. And I'm here to testify and tell you that that's exactly what happened. While I was on my face, day in and day out for 7 years, crying out to the Lord, going through my own healing, my own deliverance, my own, you know, being set free from the bondages of so many things that were broken in my life, fear, unworthiness, shame, rejection roots, you name it, I had it. So while I was walking this journey with a spouse who, for the first year, was living outside the home, and then came back because I manipulated and controlled him into coming back. But for the remainder of the time, he was living in the house, but we were living, very separate lives. We did have a lot of false starts, but he was living his own life, which was in total rebellion, total alcoholism, and affairs, one right after the other. And I begged God all the time to set me free. And I didn't understand what God was doing. I just had to hope and believe and trust because God had made me a promise that He was going to restore our relationships with Him and our marriage. He showed me a vision of my husband at the foot of the cross, repenting. And he showed me a marriage that was restored. That was my promise, and I had to write that down and hold on to it. So for 7 years, I walked this journey of building my knowledge of him, understanding of him, letting go of my idol, which was my spouse. And idols do not fall, they have to be replaced. So one by one, little things were falling off my husband. My husband was no longer the most trustworthy person in my life. Now God was. So that transition, that idol that I had on my husband of the most trustworthy now went on to God. Um, Loving my husband more than anybody else, like was evolved and centered around the fact that he'd never hurt me so badly. He'd been faithful, he'd been trustworthy, he'd been loyal. And as each one of those little places broke, and I saw, wow, my husband is a liar. My husband is a deceiver. My husband is not all that I put on him. Each one of those little idols now became loose. And I was able to say, God is trustworthy. God has good intentions toward me. My Father loves me and he desires me and he wants what's best for me. So I was able to put all of that onto the Lord. So as I walked these 7 years on my journey toward the cross, toward where I needed to go with God, and I had to keep seeing my husband looking like he was going in the exact opposite direction, which is what it looks like. But God was telling me, no, Sheila, it all looks the exact opposite, but I promise you, his journey, he's parallel. He's heading toward the cross just like you. And I'm telling you, that was one of my greatest and biggest struggles is seeing something, but having to believe something different. And that is honestly every standards struggle to see your spouse going in a complete opposite direction and having to live by faith and trust that God is pulling them into his will. And that looks so different. But I'm here to tell you that my husband, while he was going to the bars, while he was having an affair after an affair, while he was telling me things that, at first he was rebelling against God. He was very open about being rebellious against God. He didn't want God in his life. He wanted nothing to do with God. He talked about he didn't love me, he didn't want me in his life anymore. So that was the beginning. As my husband went to the bars, came home drunk night after night, you know, some nights he didn't come home at all. You would think that none of that would change him, but it did. So I'm here to tell you that even though they are in the worst possible situations, even if that looks like they are happy, they are living with someone else, they're marrying someone else, they're having children with someone else, even though it looks to be the worst situation, they're still heading toward where God wants them to go. Because little by little, in that place of my husband getting worse and worse and worse, and acting worse and rebelling worse and telling me, I started to very gradually see some changes. I started to see him looking toward God. I started to see him, doing things that brought me hope. But that was not until the very end. And I'm just here to tell you that for all that time, it just got worse and worse and worse, and it's like, how can you believe that God is healing someone and changing someone while they're going through so much rebellion? But that's what he does. And your story, what you're going through, is not what your spouse is going through, but you're both seem to be getting the same results. God knows what he's doing. He knows how to speak to his children. He knows what we need, how we need, and when we need it. And I have seen story after story of these lost spouses. I've seen them either living in total, drugs, alcohol, women, bars, and then next thing they know, you just see them go, I don't want this anymore. I want to go home. And they cry out to God, and in a moment. And then you see the spouse who's buying a house with another person. They've married the other person, and they've been telling you this whole time that they're happy, that everything's great. They're building this brand new life. They're successful in their career. And then all of a sudden, they just, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I've been living a lie. They've been living like this for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. And they call up the spouse and they open up that door. And and all of a sudden you're like, they're restored. I hear these stories all the time. And that's part of this ministry, is to bring you these stories, bring you this hope and encouragement that the world tells you that once a person leaves the marriage, they're done and they're never coming back. And I'm here to tell you, along with all of these other standards that are out there, that if you just hold on, let God reveal to you the bigger, greater, mightier purpose of what you're doing, you will see that this isn't about God just restoring a marriage. It's about God restoring a relationship. And this is why I said in the beginning, for me, a true restoration has to happen only if God is part of it. You can have a reconciliation. You can have a spouse that, comes home, but they still don't want God. They still don't want to surrender their life to Him. And to me, that is not a restoration story that is finished. It's not finished until they have given their life to Jesus. They have repented, because otherwise, whatever is going on in their heart is still there. That area where the enemy was able to come in and snare them and pull them into a temptation that set them into the trap, it's still there. My spouse was set free when he came home and pulled me out of bed and said to me that he needed God. He didn't say, I'm sorry, Sheila. He didn't say anything that had to do with our marriage. He came to me and said, I'm a mess. I need God. I need you to help me find somewhere to go. And I knew that was repentance. I saw the vision of my husband at the cross right before my eyes. And I knew that this was it. This was a man who had finally come to the end of himself, the end of his rebellion, the end of him being afraid or whatever was going on. He had finally come to a place, and it didn't look like how we want it to look. We want them to come to that place while they're home, while we're working together, but my husband didn't, and a lot of spouses don't. Now, can they come home and finish out their work? Absolutely. And that is a great thing. Sometimes a stander is afraid of that. They want their spouse to come home healed, restored to God, because it is a very scary place to have them come home still deceived, still broken, still lost. But it does happen. I've seen many, many restoration stories that started out with the spouse first deciding they wanted to try the marriage again. Not God, but the marriage. And then through that, through a stander who had been really, um, transformed by believing God, trusting God, giving their heart, by learning their identity, knowing who God is and how much He loves them, they were able to be there for that spouse, be a safe place for that husband or wife to come home and then be what they, needed to walk alongside, not as their God, but as a helpmeet or a leader, and help that spouse come to full repentance. And everyone's journey is so different there. For some, it really, for some, it's just a really hard place. Like for me, like I said, it was hard. There was no restoration for me until the very end. Every day I knew my spouse was snared. I knew he was trapped. I knew he was living in sin. And a lot of times I asked and begged God, get me out of this. This is too hard. This is too hard. But God said, Sheila, this is where he needs to be. You've got to trust me on this. So when my spouse repented, I left him to God completely, and my spouse pursued a men's group. He pursued church. He pursued reading his Bible. And it was about 3 to 4 months later that, he had been, from the moment he got on his knees in front of me and said, I need God, it was a repentance process that took 3 to 4 months before you could really see some, change in my husband, where he was no longer in that bondage. And it wasn't a quick fix, it wasn't an instant healing. He had a lot of work to do with God. And there was no time in there that I put my needs onto him. I knew that this was between him and God. I knew he was a broken man, and I knew that I could not heal him, that he had to go and be free to be with his father. He still lived at home. He came and went, and I did not pressure him, and that's what was needed. And if you are a spouse who is waiting for your husband, your wife to come home, so you can jump on them and get them to heal you, get them to fix you. That's not how it works in most cases. Most cases, they're going to come home and they just need you to, give them what the space they're requiring to be with their father. They cannot get to fix themselves with God while they're fixing you. Now, sure, we started having these talks little by little, and at last it still goes on. 7 years we have been restored. Praise God. Praise God for his handiwork. Not easy. Of course, it's not easy. Nothing is easy. But I don't regret a minute of my stand, not a minute of it, because not only did the scales fall from my eyes, I was truly healed, saved, delivered in the storm. I did not get that healing at the 7-year mark when my husband came home. I got it way, 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 way. From the moment my storm started, the healing and exposure of all of the wrong things in my life started to come forward, and God was my teacher. You are not in charge of healing yourself because you don't know how. If you did, you would have already done it. You are in charge of getting yourself to the classroom every day after day, waking up and saying, I'm still here. I'm still going to pray. I'm still going to open myself to God. I'm still going to pursue God. I'm still going to trust Him and believe in Him. And that is your posture that you should be in. And that's what I did for 7 years. There were days that I walked in and said, God, you're going to listen to me, and I'm going to tell you what I need and what you're going to do. And so that's how I approached Him. And that's how God set me straight and said, no, that's not how this is going to work. And He taught me how to submit. He taught me by exposing all the wrong things that were going on in my life. Now, that's what it looked like for me. He was teaching my husband the same thing. He's teaching you the same thing. It just looks different. My classroom was in my living room, on my face in my bed, in front of a YouTube sermon. My husband's classroom was the bar, was a hotel room, was his car, was sitting at the beach. There's so many different places that my husband had a classroom. Right in the middle of his rebellion, he was learning things. Your spouse's classroom looks different from yours, but it's not up to decide where, how, and when God talks to them, convicts them, and teaches them. We pray that God hears your spouse where they're at and answers them in their need. And that's what He does. And we pray that your spouse is courageous enough to overcome the shame, the lies, the guilt that stops them from crying out to God. But we know that God searches the heart and knows what your spouse needs, and He's all over this. He is trustworthy. He has been saving people, delivering people, healing people since the beginning of time. You've got to trust that your one little spouse compares to not even measures up to a challenge when God has been doing this for thousands and thousands of years. He's been doing this. And that's where your hope comes from, not in what you're seeing before you. Your hope comes in who He is. And when you don't know Him and you don't understand Him, that's what interferes with how strong you are. You can only be strong in the Lord when you're seeking the Lord. If you're seeking to have encouragement from things that you're, outside of God Himself, you're going to get pulled in every different direction. So I know that I gave you a lot of information. This is about an hour now that we're into this. There is a lot to learn, and it can become so overwhelming to learn it all. There's no hurry. As much as we want to hurry it up and we want to change because we believe that as soon as we change, our spouses will come home, remember this is a parallel journey. So your change doesn't mean they're going to line up and be in the same time frame as you. And for some people, and I'm going to be honest, I believe that I had the bigger change that had to occur. I was much more broken than my husband. I had so much more issues than my husband. And I believe the reason it took so long was because of me and my areas of struggle and pain. So, yeah, I really do feel, because once I came to a place of surrender and was able to say to God, I love you, our restoration happened right after that. And that's what makes me think it was a lot about me and my rebellion and my brokenness that kept me from God. So for some people, it really is about you and your relationship with God, and He's trying to get your eyes off of your spouse. And so, you know, my heart is for you to every day come to the Lord, come to His classroom, and sit yourself down and say, God, I'm here and I want to know what you want. What is your heart? What do you want to teach me today? What do you want to expose? What do you want to reveal? Just come with that posture and let Him lead you. Let Him teach you. Let Him help you. Let Him open the Word up and guide you. Sometimes it's just going to be a day of prayer, or a day of worship, a day of thanksgiving. Some days it's just a day walking on the beach, resting in Him, understanding Him. Some days it's going to be you just being angry and letting it out and screaming. Every day there can be something different that you have to learn. And that's the beautiful message, a beautiful walk and a beautiful journey. And in the end, when you reach your destination, I mean, no, we're never fully there, but when you're living in a promise, the promise has come to pass, you can sit back and say, you know, this was worth it. This was worth it. I do not regret a moment of my stand. It was the worst thing that ever happened to me, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me because I found God. I found Him. And that's what I hold on to as the meaning of everything I went through, was to get me to a place where God is the most important thing. And I discovered something that I didn't even know I needed or wanted. The same with my husband. Everything he went through, he has deep regrets, deep pain over, but he will say, that, he regrets hurting me. He regrets time lost with his children, but it was what was needed for his heart to be captured by God, for his heart to say, I know where my help comes from. It comes from the Lord. 7 years now, and my husband pursues God. I see the fruit. I see the fruit. There's not been a single week that's gone by that he has not pursued God. And we lived our life for many, many, many years where there'd be months and months where neither one of us would talk about God, open up the Bible, listen to a sermon. That was where we were, but we are completely and radically changed. Okay, and that is where we're going, and we continue to go, we continue to grow together as a couple, and that is where God is trying to take you, where both of you have an amazing relationship with Him, and through that you have an amazing relationship with each other, where God is everything to the both of you. So I just want to encourage you to keep learning this message that God's relationship must be first for both of you, and marriage comes after that. God bless you. May He watch over you. May He strengthen you in your stand. May He strengthen both of you where you're at, and encourage you that He is God and He's got this. He has a plan for the both of you, to prosper you, to strengthen you, to bring you home to Him. This is not about destroying you. This is about saving you and destroying in you what is keeping you from Him. God bless you. Check out our website, Marriage Revealed Ministries. Check out our Standers United group on Facebook. And please give this video a like. And if you haven't subscribed, love you.